Let's talk a little bit about the future of Red Dead Online. And I don't pretend to know anything. I just want to talk about what would I like to see. So let's review just a little bit what we've seen kind of recently, the last year. There's been a couple of major updates to Red Dead Online since it went from beta to non-beta, to alpha, whatever you call it when it's not beta anymore. And those were Frontier Pursuits and Moonshiners. And what those introduced specifically was the concept of roles. Before Frontier Pursuits, of course, gave us the three original roles: Bounty Hunter, Trader, and Collector. And those roles all gave us something really quite interesting to do. The Bounty Hunter missions, of course, and the bounty boards that are scattered throughout the map. And the legendary bounties, which are kind of like story missions in a way. I mean, they don't advance any plot, but they have filmed cutscenes, and they have, it's more than just the regular bounty missions. They're pretty cool. So that was something that added an awful lot to the gameplay. The Collector, not only I don't think that worked out the way that the designers initially intended. I don't think it was ever their intention that we figure out the pattern, have this map that shows where everything is, and just run around directly to the stuff, picking it up every day, making tons of money. But regardless, I think the Collector was a great idea. The idea of exploring little corners of the map that are sometimes they're far away from any roads, and they're places that you wouldn't otherwise see because there's just no reason to go out in the middle of the woods, far away from anything, because there's no reason to suspect that there's anything there to do or to see. So the Collector kind of was a little disappointing, I think, in that I don't think it lived up to exactly what it was meant to be. And I think it could have been more fun if it were more like a treasure hunter. And clearly, I think that's what they expected it to be. But unfortunately, they made the pattern too easy to figure out. They made the Collector maps too expensive. That's going to be hard to fix. But regardless, it gave us something interesting to do that we didn't have before. And then the Trader gave us a reason to hunt besides just selling to the butcher and cooking meat for ourselves. And then the Trader missions and the resupply missions were pretty cool too. The Trader as a role is perhaps a little flatter than the others. But the point is before Frontier Pursuits and the three roles, there wasn't really a lot to do in online. You'd run around, you could do the PvP, and that stuff's still there, and you could do that before. And some people really like that, although there's been a lot of informal surveys conducted by Red Dead fans that suggest that a lot fewer people are interested in that kind of stuff than they thought. They don't do the PvP missions. They don't posse up. They just treat Red Dead Online as a different solo game, and they just play it by themselves. And frankly, I do it that way myself. That's how I prefer to play. And if I had friends who had PS4s and who played Red Dead Online, I would think about posseing up with them, but I don't know of anybody that does. And I don't want to make friends just to be posse members. I'm perfectly happy playing Red Dead Online as basically a solo game where occasionally other players are running around near me. So, but before that, there wasn't really, so that was there to do. There were stranger missions, which are not only repetitive after a while, but they're not super thrilling. But there really wasn't a ton to do. So the Frontier Pursuits really gave the game something to do, and it set a pattern for how we introduced new gameplay elements. And the Moonshiners actually improved on that pattern significantly, and I think that what we're going to see is that future roles look more like the Moonshiner update than they do like the Frontier Pursuits update. We'll get one role at a time instead of three, but it'll be a much more fleshed out role. It will have its own unique story elements. It might have properties like the Moonshiner role does. And then it will have, things that you do, after you do the story missions, after you kind of set up your shack. In reality, running the Moonshine business isn't terribly different than running the Trader business, although it's a little easier and a little more passive, and you can kind of have it running in the background while you're doing other things. So I really love the Moonshiner role. And then, of course, before that, you had all the story missions to do. So the Moonshiner role really kind of set a great pattern for how to add gameplay elements to the game. And Rockstar have clearly signaled that is a big part of their strategy, is that I don't know how often do they do it, once a quarter or triannually. It's either once every 4 months or every 3 months. There's supposed to be a big update. Maybe it's only twice a year. Maybe I'm wrong. Regardless, whenever there's big updates, they're going to add a role, and they kind of have signaled that that's how they're going to do it. The roles are probably going to be more fleshed out like the Moonshiner role was. I think that the game needs a little bit more, and it wouldn't be hard to do. And I think it could also be intertwined with the roles. So let me explain exactly what I mean. And first, let me back up. There's been a lot of requests for a DLC for Red Dead 2. And of course, there was a DLC for Red Dead 1, which was Undead Nightmare. It was very well received, very popular. A lot of people have, in fact, asked for Undead Nightmare 2, which I think is a bad idea. I don't think that, just let's take the same idea and do it again. What I think a lot of people would like, and this is especially true for people who never played it because they either didn't have that system or they just were too young or whatever, I think a fun DLC to do, and a lot of people have asked for this, and a lot of people have thought it was likely, is give us remastered Red Dead 1 within the game of Red Dead 2. And so I don't know exactly how that would work. Maybe John's free roam would still allow him to go to Lemoyne and Roanoke Ridge and all that, but all his story missions would be, in the area where they were in the first game. And, there'd be new costumes, new characters, new side quests, new whatever. And then, of course, there would also be all the story missions. I think that would be doable. What does that mean, though? One of the significant things it means is that they need to add Nuevo Paraíso, because that was a core element of the first map, and it was small, but it was core, and it didn't make it to the Red Dead 2 map. And I'm not quite sure why, because there are players who have managed to exploit glitches to get outside of the playable area of the map and run around, and you can explore that territory, and it's there. It's all modeled. It's relatively fully textured. Maybe there needs to be a little bit of cleanup. Definitely, the towns need to be added because they're not there, with the exception of a skeleton for Presidio. And the only reason that's there is because you can actually see it from the playable area. That needs to be added. Some towns, some stranger missions, some other things to do. But what they could do with this is really also use it as an opportunity to have a role that's tied to this new territory. And what I'm thinking of here is some kind of smuggler or gun runner. And they don't have to smuggle gun. They can smuggle anything. Because it's a border, you could have some kind of boat, maybe. You could have some kind of safe house. And you could have a bunch of story missions. And you could have kind of like a smuggling business where you make deliveries, from one side of the border to the other. And maybe even you expand the area a little bit, because interestingly enough, these people who glitch out of the map and go to Nuevo Paraíso, they say that if you continue going east from Nuevo Paraíso, there's a whole bunch of territory there too. I don't know what Rockstar calls it, but the players sometimes call it either South Elizabeth or East Elizabeth or the Southern Plains or whatever. There's an area just to the east of like the Torquemada area, which was not part of either map, but it's there in this map, and it's fully textured. It looks great. It really looks like it was designed to be used. It's also across the river. Actually, it's kind of just south of Flatiron Lake. So, and then if you keep going, there's more cypresses and flatlands that look kind of like the main body of Florida, quite honestly, that are also south of the Lenahatchee River, or the San Luis River, or the Flatiron Lake. They go up all the way to opposite of St. Denis, and they kind of even start wrapping around, and it goes all the way up to up beyond Annesburg, although, the terrain changes as it does that. And it's not all fully rendered, but the section that's next to Nuevo Paraíso is really fully rendered, and they could just kind of keep going as far as they wanted to. They don't have to go super far, but you could add an awful lot to the map. And then, of course, adding to the map without giving us something to do is a mistake, though. I think New Austin already suffers, and the southern part of West Elizabeth, everything that was part of the original map, quite honestly, suffers a little bit in the sense that there's not enough to do in that area. And so you don't really go beyond Blackwater all that often unless you're trying to do something specifically in that area. And even then, you do some collectibles, maybe you do some bounties, but I've never felt tempted to set up my camp in New Austin, really, for example. I just feel like there's not enough to do there. So I think if you add this new territory to the map, there needs to be something to do. And I think tying a role specifically, having it intertwined with the new territory is a great way to do that. I think that would be a really fun DLC/update to online. While we're at it, there's some other territories of the map that are developed and not used. In fact, and this is a little bit speculative, but it's hard to disagree with it. It looks very much like Rockstar, fairly late in development, changed the face of the map in the West Grizzlies. And there's a whole big chunk of the West Grizzlies that looks like it was meant to be core, and it is now inaccessible. It's in the map, but you can't get to it unless you exploit, this camp glitch where you get right next to the edge of it and set up your camp, and then it sets you up over there. This is in single player only, you can do this. But this whole Tempest Rim area, which you can see on the map, it's labeled, but you can't get to it, is fully textured and looks like it's pretty well developed. There are paths and roads that run through it. They look exactly like the paths and roads that are in the other part of the snowy area, but they're not, programmed to act like them. You can't lock your destination on them and have the little red line show up and all that stuff. But it looks like they were textured and they were meant to be used that way. There's even a big flat spot that was presumably the original location of Coulter, and there was a leaked map that came out before the game that seemed to show that Coulter would be there, and lo and behold, right exactly where Coulter was supposed to be, there's kind of a valley with a big flat spot. I think that's another area that's rife for being added. In fact, not only is Tempest Rim there, but then on the other side of the West Grizzlies, there's a lot of fully textured and developed terrain just outside of the map to the west, and it looks like it was likely that there was a prologue mission that was abandoned because they didn't feel like it just kind of dragged on, and they just wanted to, what they ended up doing is cutting that mission and just adding a very short cutscene, and then the first thing that happens is you show up in Coulter after a little tiny cutscene. But it looks like what originally was meant to happen was that the gang literally had to travel through the mountains to get to Coulter, and that was actually a mission. And so there's this fully rendered area just to the west or the left of the West Grizzlies. There's a, up there on the glacier, there's crevasses. There's the little area where John was attacked by wolves and you rescue him. That is actually outside the map. You can only access it in that mission. Although, again, exploiting glitches, you can get to it. So open all that stuff up. They literally developed it. They rendered it. They textured it. The map is ready to go. It just needs to be stuffed with some things to do. And it would basically double the playable size of the West Grizzlies. Now, I don't think doubling the size of the West Grizzlies is a good idea unless they give us something to do. It's already a big area, but there's nothing to do there. So I think there needs to be a town where Coulter was supposed to be. Put an actual town there, like a Valentine or a Rhodes or a Tumbleweed, except in the snow, and put businesses there, put things to do. I also think that there should be a role associated with that. And I've got a few ideas. I don't know that they're great. There's a lot. They could do some kind of hunter role, something with the legendary animals. I think they could do something with some kind of prospecting. Maybe you go up there and you buy maps, or maybe every level you get a map, and then you can use that to go to a location somewhere on the rivers that flow out of the West Grizzlies and pan for gold. And every level you get that map, you go do it, and you get a quarter of a gold bar or something. You don't want to make it too big because you don't want to wreck the gold bar economy. But if if it gave you something to do and it gave you a reason to go up there, and it gave you more than just run up there and get the map and then leave again, but there's also other things to do while you're there, you could turn that into a really productive place in the map. It takes up a lot of space, but people don't generally go up there very often because there's no reason to. Everything up there is empty. All you can do is shoot animals, but they're so far away from everything that you just gotta, spend 10 minutes dragging them back to Valentine or whatever, just so you can get rid of them. And you go up there for a few collectibles, and when you do, it's a real hassle because they're so far away from the rest of them. There's one of the cycles where there's a coin run, and you got to go pick up a coin in the Adler barn. It takes like 15, 20 minutes just to go get that one coin. It's ridiculously far away. So they need to they need to actually develop that, but they don't need to develop it in terms of scenery. They need to develop it in terms of something to do. And I think having a role up there, some kind of prospector maybe, it makes sense because there's the Mililani claim and there's, Coulter's an abandoned mining town. Well, let's just say the Coulter, that vein or whatever was mined out, but now there's like new claims popping up in Tempest Rim, and so there's a little bit of a boom town or a little bit of a gold rush going on, and it gives people a reason to go explore this new area, which would be really cool. And I think that would be a fun new role too, and it would be different than what we already have, which would be nice because you don't want the gameplay to be too similar to what we already have. I think, down the line, there's some other roles, and maybe these are a little more out there ideas, but then again, they're not nearly as out there as Undead Nightmare was, is what about, there's an awful lot of supernatural Easter eggs. There's aliens, there's a freaking vampire, there's several ghosts and ghost stories, there's pagan rituals and demonic curses and pentagrams and cultists and the night folk, whatever the heck they are, if there's some kind of Haitian-style voodoo zombies or whatever they are. There's an awful lot of opportunity to expand on that. What if you could have a role that was kind of like Sam and Dean Winchester from the Supernatural TV show, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the Old West, or Van Helsing in America, or something like that. A monster hunter that actually turns these supernatural Easter eggs into a little bit more than an Easter egg, and it actually becomes an entire role unto itself. I think another thing that would be really interesting is expand on the concept of the legendary animals and, hunting them in some respect. When Thomas Jefferson commissioned Lewis and Clark to go find the Pacific Ocean and they went across the continent, he actually told them, and he believed, that they would find animals that ended up being extinct. Giant sloths, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, dire wolves, a bunch of other animals that had lived here not that long before we did. And although science largely tells us that they went extinct 10,000 years ago, there's an awful lot of reasons to suspect that maybe some of them lasted longer than that, at least in small numbers. There's an awful lot of first-hand accounts from Indians in the 1700s and 1800s who remembered, or their living ancestors or grandparents or whatever, remembered hunting elephants, for example. In South America, this is obviously further away, in South America, there's actually a lot of art in some of the Indian ruins, the Inca and Aztec and Mayan ruins, that seem to show domesticated elephants. And elephants, of course, in this sense, would not be, elephants. They would be mammoths or mastodons or gomphotheres or some of these other elephant-like animals that lived on the American continent until just very recently. So what if, in addition to the legendary animals, once you kind of got the legendary animals from single player, you could unlock some truly legendary animals, saber-toothed cats, mammoth, something like that. There's already hints about it. There's a saber-tooth mask you can get for your horse. In free roam, in single player, I haven't even looked to see if it's there in online or not, but there's a mammoth skeleton up there in the snow. It's not a fossil, it's just an actual skeleton. There's the Bigfoot skeleton. There's a lot of opportunity for some kind of cryptid hunter, and these cryptids could be animals that we think are extinct, but let's bring them back, at least in limited numbers, for Red Dead Online. So those are just some of my ideas of potential roles down the line. I do think that the idea of tying some of these roles to new map areas is a fun idea that I would really enjoy. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of places that are mentioned that we don't know. Where's Deer Creek? Where's North Elizabeth? Well, we know that Deer Creek, Hosea and Arthur talk about it during one of their rides, and something happened there with the Calendar Boys, right? So it's a place, but it's not a real place. Where is it? Maybe that's the town that you stick up there in Tempest Rim. Or North Elizabeth, that's where Sean joined the gang. Well, what's North Elizabeth? Is that a state? Is that a town? Is that a city? Who knows? I don't know what it is. That's a place that they could use. Brimstone and some of the other places from Red Dead Revolver, where are they? I don't know. There's lots of opportunity to place them somewhere. There's lots of space that's not utilized, that's in the map, but you can't access it. And if you go, for example, there's this vast area north of New Austin and west of West Elizabeth that is, it's there, it's modeled. It's not fully textured, but it's not low poly either. It's not like super low resolution. It looks reasonably good. And you could do some stuff there. You could put some of the Red Dead Revolver locations there. It would be really interesting. There's some other places that are mentioned briefly too, Canyon City. We don't know where this stuff is. It would be really nice if they gave us some more map, and not just more roles on the existing map, but gave us, more map and a role that's tied to that area, gives us more of a reason to use it and to go there and to do things there. And they they come hand in hand. It's not just more map to explore, but then once you see everything, who cares? It's not just a role. It's actually both of them at the same time. So in my opinion, that's the best way to develop Red Dead in the future. And I think it also works really well because, it gives us the opportunity for them to give us a remastered Red Dead 1, which a lot of people have been asking for and would really love to see. And I think a lot of people who play Red Dead 2 now never had a chance to play Red Dead 1 for whatever reason. I didn't. I never had a PS3. I skipped that generation, so I never had one. So I never played Red Dead 1. I would like to. If I could do it as a DLC, and it would kind of just be added to, a bunch of new story missions added, and you take John and the epilogue, and then you just go do them, or maybe you kind of kick it off as part of your save game, or maybe you just start a whole new save game and you just do that stuff. I don't want to get too prescriptive in how I think it should be done, but I think it's something that would